This is Solve It for Kids.
Hello, my amazing and curious friends. My name is Jennifer, the Dean of all things STEM and STEAM, and this is Solve It for Kids, the podcast that gives kids and families a peek inside the real world of scientists, engineers, and experts as they solve problems in their jobs using creativity, cooperation, and critical thinking. And now please welcome to the show my podcast partner, Galactic Space Geek, Jeff Gagne.
Hello, Jennifer, and hello, listeners. No, you can't hear sound in space, but I'd be willing to bet a lot of the sounds that you do hear, you're not paying attention to. And we're going to talk about that today.
Oh, this is a pretty intriguing episode, I have to agree. So what problem are we solving today?
How do you create sound for a movie?
How do you create sound for a movie? You know, I've always wondered that. I always thought this was really cool. So I'm excited to hear from our guest. Who is our guest today, Jeff?
Our guest today, we have the right person to be talking to, is Bob Pepek. He is sound designer and owner of MelonCollie Productions.
Welcome to the show, Bob.
Nice to meet you. Thank you so much.
We are thrilled to have you. This is going to be such a fun episode, and we're going to talk about sound for a movie. So I have to ask, were you one of those kids that loved going to the movies?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, between
Nice.
cartoons, movies, you named it. I was 3 inches from the TV when I wasn't supposed to.
All right. Do you have any favorites that you can remember from being young that really snapped and caught your interest?
I always grew up a Star Wars nerd. I mean,
Yes.
true
You
and
are with
true.
fellow fans.
Oh yeah, and to this day, I'm still a Star Wars nerd. I can't negate that.
Wonderful.
And they did some pretty amazing sound for Star Wars back then, didn't they? That was brand new.
They sure did. I mean, that was one of the things that actually drew me into it. Yeah, basically, one of the main sound designers for Star Wars, Ben Burtt, he came up with all these cool, unique sounds.
Yes.
The way he came up with them was just insane. It was just so surreal how he came up with these noises that didn't exist in real world. You know, obviously you couldn't go up and mic up a spaceship flying in space or something.
Or make R2-D2 sounds, right? Like all of
Exactly.
that was so cool.
And there are so many different sounds in Star Wars. Now, that one's kind of, I almost want to say I'm completely with you on the Star Wars sound effects, but that one I feel like is kind of cheating as an answer. That one's a little bit too easy. Was there a different movie when you were younger that maybe not the rest of us sort of caught on, that caught your ear, that maybe even surprised you back when you were younger?
Honestly, like a lot of, I know it's staying in the, not to say the same genre, but I mean, like the Lucas stuff, it would be like Indiana Jones.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Just, it was unique. The punches, the whip snaps, everything like that was just,
Right.
I'm not going to venture as far to say cartoony, but not like the Batman pow bam.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? The punches they would snap, there would be a lot of, that was unique for me.
So how did you get into sound engineering? Like as a kid, how do you just say, hey, that's what I want to do?
Well, believe it or not, it wasn't the first thought that went through my head because it was really one of those things where not to say I didn't know it existed, but it was really one of those, I didn't know how somebody would go about doing something like this.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
So basically, I always grew up, I played guitar since I was 10 years old.
Oh, okay.
And
wow.
I wanted to get into the audio engineering field, but I knew I didn't really want to be a music producer. It was really one of those things where I spent a lot of time in recording studios.
Right.
So for me, it was really I would look over my producer's shoulder and see how he would do things and pick things up here and there.
Okay.
And then I went to school for audio engineering. Well, I went to Berklee College of Music in Boston
Okay.
for film scoring to write music for film and TV.
Oh, wow.
And it wasn't until I got into the industry that I absolutely hated it. So
Oh, no.
Oh,
Well,
no.
okay.
it gave me the knowledge and the toolkit that I needed to do the audio engineering end of things, to venture into sound design. Basically,
Ah.
I guess I got a little burnt out because when you get into an industry doing something, you're doing things for free or little to no money.
Oh, yes.
Sure.
I write kids' books. I know this very well.
As a creative, it's a burn spot. You know what I mean? It's really one of those. It
Yes.
kind of it stings. So when I first got into it with film scoring, it was really one of those things where you're doing like student films and stuff like that. And these students may not know exactly what they're looking for. They're a film student. They're not an audio person.
Right.
So they would ask you, hey, can you write me something upbeat? Okay. So I score out this, this orchestral piece that, full ensemble.
Yes.
And I would get a response. I put, tens of 20s of hours into it. And I would get like it sounds okay. Can we try something else?
You do know the book industry.
So that was kind of a letdown. So it'd be one of those things where, like, obviously if you sound design something and your creative tells you, hey, I don't like that gunshot sound. It's one of the, oh yeah, cool. Okay, I can swap that out. That takes 2 seconds.
Yes.
Gotcha.
It was a lot more gratifying for me, and I could be a lot more creative with things. And I love the fact that with animation, I think I've pretty much made my mark in the animation field, if you will.
Okay.
Fun.
That's cool.
I do some sound design work with feature-length films, or live action films, I should say. I'm actually sound designing a film with like Ice-T and Mickey Rourke and stuff like that.
Oh, wow.
Called 3 Days Rising, and it's kind of a thriller, and it's not really meant for kids, but but the thing that I love about sound designing for animation is you need to recreate your entire environment. There's nothing when you're recording a live action film, you have birds chirping in the background, you have planes flying by, you have cars. So your palette is already there. You know what I mean? You have a base for things that you can.
That makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's part of your production audio. In post-production, it's one of those, when you're working with animation, it's a clean slate. You need to recreate that entire environment.
Oh, wow.
Right.
So, but the trick is you need to sell it to your listener to make sure that it sounds realistic. It's not something that's artificially created. You want them to believe that this animation really does have birds in the background and,
Sure.
Wow. I never thought of it that way, but yeah, I mean, so you start with no sound.
Yep.
Right. And you have to fill it all in. Oh my gosh.
Sell the illusion. And one of the greatest, I'm not going to call it a quote because honestly, I don't know who said it, but I thought it was so brilliant that, a good designer, someone's going to tell you that, wow, this sounds, incredible. This was amazing, an amazing sound design you would never even know existed. You know what I mean? It's really one of those things.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
You don't even realize that it's been created. It just sounds natural. It just sounds like it was just mic'd up and that's what's there.
Wow.
Okay.
And the thing that I enjoy about it is there was a Polish composer, Krzysztof Penderecki, and he was known for his big composition. It was, I believe it was in the 40s, called Threnody for the Victims of Hiroshima.
Okay.
And he had this concept that kind of like blew my mind, that when you think about if you were looking at like a pot of boiling water,
right?
Yeah.
Your brain perceives that as one instance. You see all these bubbles that are popping up, but your brain can't really focus on each and every bubble that's popping.
Right.
So sure.
Your brain perceives that as one instance. And I look at sound design the same way when it comes down to everything that you hear around you when you step outside is one big instance. You're not focusing on, unless you train your brain to focus on, there's a jetliner flying over my head. There's a car that's driving by behind me. I hear birds in the trees. I hear, this going on. Like I hear a car starting. I hear a police train go off in the distance. Your brain analyzes that as one big instance. And, the more and more I thought about it like that, or sound design in that perspective, it really opened up my mind to how creative you can actually be with audio for film and TV.
That's
Okay.
amazing.
You totally just changed my evening TV watching
Yes,
tonight.
mine too. Mine
I
too.
might as well watch with my eyes closed because my ears are going to be like, I heard that. I heard a door shut. I heard everything.
Me
You will
too.
be
Bob would be proud of me.
You'd be amazed with how much you can actually pick up on when you do something. And you're 100% correct. When you close your eyes and you listen to a movie, because, it's really one of those things where there's so much hidden in it. Like there's so many hard
Right.
sound effects. And I say hard sound effects, they're door closing and stuff like that.
Sure.
That, obviously when they're miking things up on set, the sound guy isn't walking around with a microphone going over to the door.
Right.
So when he's miking up the vocals or the dialogue on an actor, that door may be way over here when it shuts. So they don't want to go back and record that. They'll sound design it in, and it becomes
Okay.
you really start to think how much is actually, that would be very time consuming to go and record every sound that
that
to make it
happened in a
authentic.
scene. Right. Wow.
So to sell that, you have sound design. So
Nice.
a lot of work.
That's very cool.
So,
Yeah.
Okay, so we kind of jumped into the industry. What was your first gig in the sound design industry?
My first gig was I worked on an NBC kids show on Sprout Network and NBC. It was called Astroblast. And
Okay.
it was a preschool show about a bunch of animals that ran like a smoothie stand in space.
I love that.
I'll tell you one thing, and this is like my big inspiration story that I kind of tell people when they ask me these kind of things. Because for me, I always tell people, like, don't stop until you are happy in your working environment. I love what I do. And I busted my bum to get where I am. I took internships. I did everything I learned. I was up late nights watching tutorial videos.
Right.
That's
I
fantastic.
I was working a job that I was so miserable at. I was so unbelievably miserable. And I sent out a resume to this job that I landed, my first industry gig. And I hit it off with the interviewer. We knew a lot of the same people.
Okay.
And I waited
Wow.
2 weeks and didn't hear anything. So I reached back out and they had said, oh, sorry, we went with somebody else that had a little bit more experience. So that hurt so much because I felt like I was, back at the drawing board and I was back at,
Right.
Sure.
I was still stuck with this horrible job. It was about 3 months later, that company had another show come up which was Astroblast, which needed a dialogue editor. And they called me up and they didn't say, hey, we want you to come in for an interview. They said, hey, can you start next week? And
Oh, nice.
That's awesome.
I would never, ever tell somebody to not put in a 2-week notice or not, I went to my boss and told him, hey, this is my 2-week notice, but it's literally a day notice because I'm taking the week for myself. And it was such a relief. There's so much stress off my chest.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's where I started as just a dialogue editor. I would just chop up the recorded dialogue from the voice actors and I would piece it together to make it flow and make it sound
Right.
conversational.
Wow.
And then when the sound designer went on vacation, I would fill in for him. And it was inputting sound, like using all sorts of a vast array of sound, Hanna-Barbera sounds and everything like that
Oh my
Okay.
gosh.
to sell the realism of the sound effects for the show. So that's how I got my foot in the door with sound design.
That's fantastic.
I love it.
So when you're doing animation, okay, it's one thing when you have people talking in backgrounds, but when you're doing an animation and it's blank, like, how do you know what to put in? Are you looking at like the storyline and all this kind of stuff, and then you choose the sound?
For the most part, yeah. I mean, unless the director
Wow.
has some creative, direction on how they want to proceed. You have to look at your shot. Like you say, I mean, if it is an animation and say you have a desert scene,
Okay.
you have to open up your brain to think, what am I going to hear in a desert? And so, you may
Right.
hear
Wow.
coyotes, you may hear rattlesnakes, you may hear a lot of wind. You'll hear more of
Yeah.
like crows caws instead of like, you won't hear like a robin or a bluebird,
Right.
Right.
pro. And when you think about it, someone like me who lives on the Eastern Seaboard, I live in Connecticut. I live, an hour away from water, from the ocean.
Yes.
I don't have a desert I can go out to.
Right.
So, I have to use my, creative thought to figure out, what is this going to sound like? What am I going to? So you either use inspiration where you actually
Wow.
watch a desert scene of a movie if you really don't know, or it could be as creative as, I hate to say, what am I going to hear in space? Obviously, you're not going to hear anything, but that's where the creativity opens up. And what would this sound like? If it's really big, could it be big and clunky? Could you hear creaking metal? Could you hear gears going? The hum of the engine? So, it really opens up your ability to think outside the box. And especially when you start to get down to the nitty gritty, when there's people walking around and you have to think of cloth movement, like jeans walking.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
There's so much involved. And if you don't stop yourself ahead of time, you'll get a little too in depth with it. And then you realize, crap, I have a deadline in 8 hours.
And I'm only 4 minutes into the movie.
Exactly. So you have to know when to stop yourself and reel yourself back in a little bit, but you can get really creative with it. And it's a lot of fun. And, obviously you don't want some big spaceship to sound like this little tinkering little, watch gears and stuff.
Right.
My husband had a car one time. It was like a big, I can't remember, Lexus, one of those like SUVs. And it's this kind of big car. And it had this little tiny horn. And I mean, seriously, you look at this thing and go, why? This does not match this car.
Well, sometimes
Who designed that sound?
Sometimes you have to fake it. I hate to say that. The one example I had is I worked on a short film, a live action short film. And it was about this father who had dementia, and the families struggled to getting him to understand, to kind of, let's say, reel him back in. And there's one scene where the father wakes up early and he gets in the family car and starts to drive away. And the family panics, but the family doesn't realize it until he starts the car. They hear the car start outside. But the funny thing is the car, it was a Prius or something, so it really doesn't have.
It doesn't have that start sound.
It doesn't have that, you don't hear the engine,
Right.
It's really just like a, and it just kind of takes. So we had to put a different engine sound, and obviously, if you pay attention to it, you're going to be like, hey, then no,
that's not Prius.
So I had to bring that to the director's attention, and he's like, whatever, just I'm like, well, I'm not going to make it sound like a Mack truck, but at the same time,
now that would have been
funny. Let
funny.
it sound like a Prius.
So again, sometimes you have to, fake it a little bit to squeak by, but most of the time people are none the wiser.
Yeah.
Okay, so that kind of leads me into a question I didn't know I was going to want to ask you, but that makes me want to ask, is it harder to sound design real sounds like a car starting or a door closing to match it with reality, or is it harder to create something from scratch?
Good question.
Honestly, I'd say it's harder to actually create something in live action, only because you need to match the environment. So a lot of the difference that you get, which, I mean, you still run into this with animation, but you have to sell the fact that this is a real sound, not something fake, or, I mean, because it's easy for you to believe like, oh, okay, that's a spaceship sound. That's not a, like, so
right.
That is
the
not
BAMs
a
and the
tractor
POWs
sound
from Batman, yes.
And I guess the best way to really describe this would be, have you seen the series The Mandalorian or anything like that?
Yes.
So you've seen the CG Luke Skywalker, and
yes,
with also the CG Leia and everything like that. So the human brain can't conceive something that's just too real. They know that that is not a real face. They know that no matter how close to real it is, your brain tells you that no, that's not real. That is not. It can be so close to perfect, but your brain will tell you that is not real. And it's the same thing with sound design. When you think about it, if you had a metal door, the creaking of a metal door that was shutting and whatnot, you hear the latch and everything, and you see a wood door, you see a clanky, an old antique wood door, it's going to take you out of it. It's going to take the immersion out of it. So you need to make sure that viewer is immersed.
Okay.
And even with reflections, when you have footsteps and stuff like that, if you're walking through a cave or something like that,
Right.
you have to have that echo.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
a lot of the times when you have footstep sounds effects and stuff like that, they don't come with, echo. You need to use certain reverbs and certain plugins that actually what's called a convolution reverb, which is going to mimic an actual echo in a theater, in a cave, if you're in a bathroom or
Wow.
anything like that. They have what are called impulse responses, which are created to mimic those environments, if you will. So
Okay.
again, when you're trying to sell the realism,
Yeah.
it's very easy to, once you pull a viewer out of the immersion, you
Right.
lost them, because
Right.
it takes their attention off the story, and that's what you really don't want that viewer to do. You want them focusing on the dialogue and everything else. The sounds are just there.
Right.
Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to downplay my
Oh no.
I don't
I
get fired for my sound effects. Nothing. But if you lose the realism and if you lose that immersion, you've lost your viewer, because now
Yes.
you're paying attention to
Totally understand that.
that doesn't
Yeah.
sound right. Why did that car fart or make
Where did that come from? Well, yeah, because you're probably trying to figure out where that sounds. So now I want to know, where do you get all of these sounds?
Well, there's many companies that have either sound production libraries, sound effect libraries. There's some that are subscription based, some that are you just pay like a lifetime license fee for the library itself.
Okay.
You either go that route or you do what's called Foley. And Foley is recording. There are Foley artists out there, which are people that will record in a room that is full. It just looks like every hoarder's dream, that is just filled with junk. It has car doors hanging on the wall. It has like a gravel pit. So they would
Okay.
and walk in sand, walk on tile with high heel. It'll be a guy walking in high heels.
Right.
Yeah.
Make these sounds. So you can make them yourself. Personally, I don't have I'm in a commercial space here. There's a therapist right on the other side of the wall with me. So if I was in here slamming car doors and stuff, I'd probably get evicted and kicked out. But so instead, I have just an endless supply of sound effects, and I subscribe to these other services where they'll have just hundreds of thousands of sound effects that you can one-off. That hey, if I don't have a seagull sound, I'll look and see if they have something. And sometimes you either pay per sound effect, so it'll cost you like $5 a sound. I need it for this set. So yeah, I mean, over the years, I've acquired just so many sound effects. But again, you need things to sound exactly as they are. You can't have a Prius drive by and put in a Corvette sound.
Right.
You can probably get by with a Chevy Aveo or a Ford Fiesta or something, but you can't put a muscle car in there as a, you know what I mean? So you need things to sound as authentic as possible. Even if you need that Civil War musket gunfire, go looking for it, because it's going to take the viewer out of the immersion if you have the wrong sound.
Wow.
Right. Okay, so I don't want us to run out of time before I get a chance to ask this. So I got to bring you back to the start. When you were a kid, you loved the Star Wars movies, and you loved the sound effects and the sounds that were in it. Please tell me you can give us a story or some information about one of the coolest sounds in Star Wars, the TIE Fighters.
I sure can. Now, the
TIE
Yes.
The TIE Fighter was one of the most iconic sounds you will ever hear in Star Wars history. Ben Burtt still is one of the best sound designers to ever grace the world, to walk the world. So he had basically his inspiration that he went by was the old World War II super dive bombers. So the big dive bombers would have these superficial air vents that were in them that they really didn't have a purpose. They didn't have a function.
Right.
When the dive bombers would dive, they would create this wailing siren sound, and it would terrify all the people because they knew that a dive bomber was coming. And
wow.
So they wanted to use that as an inspiration to basically, they wanted to instill fear in the listener. They wanted to understand that something bad was coming when the TIE fighter was approaching.
Right.
So, with them having the 20th Century Fox back catalog, when they had their different films that they worked on, Ben Burtt had access to these sounds. So there was a film called Roots of Heaven, and it was like a nature film and stuff. So he ended up taking the elephant roars, or to say the screaming elephants, if you will,
Right.
and slowed down the trumpeting of the elephant. So he slowed that down, and that's how you ended up getting the scream sound from the TIE fighter.
Oh my gosh.
But it wasn't like complete for Ben. Like he needed something else. So he went out and he mic'd up cars driving by on like wet pavement. So it had kind of like that hissing, crackly kind of sound.
Okay.
Layered the two together and boom. And he didn't really care for it when he first put them together. And when everybody at Lucas, when they listened to it, they fell in love with it. And that became the iconic sound that he came up with for the TIE fighters.
That's
no kidding.
I mean, yeah,
Thank you for sharing that.
That is completely iconic. So I do have one last question. How long does it take you to do this?
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking there's thousands of different sounds. I mean, I can
Listeners,
see you.
I wish you could just see the look on Bob's face when Jen asked him that. Oh my goodness.
If you ask my wife, it takes way too long.
Well, there you go.
But it really depends on what you're sound designing. Because when you think about it, if you're sound designing a romantic comedy, then you're just getting, it's a lot of talking heads and it's maybe some ambient, some birds chirping in the background, maybe the creaking of a chair or something like that. But when you start getting a sci-fi action film or something with a chase scene, it can take a long time. And it really depends on, again, whether or not if you're sound designing a commercial, something for PayPal or something like that, or if you're doing a short film or a feature length. It can take you hours, it can take you a weekend, it can take you months.
Wow.
There's a lot involved in it.
Well, I mean, I could see myself getting lost in this. Do I like this one or this one? This one or this one? Decide. I can't decide.
What's fun too is also trying to listen to something and trying to figure out what is that. And obviously you knew the TIE fighter was a real sound, but listening to it and trying to ask yourself, what is making that sound? Like I can identify it's something that I know. And if you listen to it, if you listen to a TIE fighter, you'll realize, wow, that is an elephant sound. I don't have time to go into the many, many layers they did for Jurassic Park's T-Rex roar. But,
wow.
We might have to have you back because that would be another set of questions I've got as a huge Jurassic Park fan. But
to ruin one awkward thing for you, one of the sounds they used was actually turtles mating. So,
all
right. I'm going to have to watch the movie first, see if I can figure it out before I go find out which one. But I will say, I love all of our guests, but I will say, I do think you have just changed watching for people.
Yes.
You have opened my eyes to sound.
Your ears, Jeff. Your ears.
Oh, did I say my eyes? You have just opened my eyes to sound, and I think it is going to be a very different experience from now on.
Yeah, I think it's going to be so fun. Okay, well, now I'm really excited. We're at the end of the show, and now I'm not excited for that because it's been fun chatting with you. But I want to know what your challenge is for our listeners.
Good. Oh, this is going to be fun. So, what I challenge you to do is to take 2 minutes and sit in your environment, sit wherever you are in your bedroom, if you're outside on a park bench, and just listen to your surroundings. I want you to find 15 discrete sounds. Now, for instance, for example, right now I'm sitting in a very quiet studio. This is where I do all my mixing for animations.
Okay.
Very quiet. However, I can name probably about 10 things that I can hear between the whining of my computer, the processor whining.
Oh, yeah.
I can hear the compressor on my mini fridge. I can hear the baffles of the fluorescent lights kind of vibrating a little bit with the AC that coming through. Every time I rock back and forth in my chair. I can hear the squeaking of the chair. There's people, which really shouldn't be talking outside my studio. And so there's that. There's birds chirping. I can hear cars driving outside. It may seem dead quiet in the studio, but there is so much. And now imagine being outside.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
You can think of
This
a lot.
is gonna
It's
be
harder
great.
than you think, but to come up with 15 different sounds. But once you start getting past 10, you'll realize this is kind of hard. You really need to focus. And that's how you strengthen your brain. That's how you really hone in your talent to be a sound designer, is listen to your environment. What do you hear?
Wow.
I
Oh, that's
love it.
cool. That's a great challenge. This is going to be so exciting. I hope I'm going to do this, Jeff, but you probably will do
Oh, totally.
this too.
In several different environments. Totally.
Yeah, this is going to be so great. Bob, it has been wonderful. I have learned so much about sound engineering. Thank you so much for being on Solid
Thank
for
you
Kids.
very much, Bob.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
What a fun episode, and to delve into how they make some of those sounds, why they make them the way they do, and how they include them in the movies. We are absolutely taking this way too much for granted, and over the next couple of weeks, everything I watch on TV or in a movie theater, if I happen to go, I am totally going to have ears wide open.
Yes. You know, it's so amazing. And then what I loved was there's so many different sounds. And he was talking about how you can kind of go down a rabbit hole and spend hours doing this. I could see that because I'd be like, okay, so that one's not exactly it. No, this one. No, you know, I mean, you go over and over.
Blending.
But when you hear it, to you, it just seems like, well, yeah, of course that's what it was supposed to sound like, right?
Right.
Like, so, I mean, I give big kudos to Bob and all the other sound engineers that work on movies and cartoons and everything. What a fun and probably challenging job at times.
Agreed 100%, and total appreciation for their work, even though we don't necessarily appreciate it as we're watching all the time.
Right.
This challenge hits all of our listeners once again.
Yes.
In your own environment, work, home, school, playing, time off, out for a jog, at the gym, doesn't matter what age, sit quietly for 2 solid minutes and listen to the sounds. Even just that little pause was only a couple of seconds. 2 solid minutes is gonna be a lot. And Jen, the first thing I think of is, I think the only time adults really do this is when we're in our car and we hear a new weird noise.
Oh yeah, is that a clank? Is that like, what is that?
Right, exactly. This is gonna be fun.
I hope everyone goes out and does this challenge, and if you do, share it with us. Tell us maybe some of the sounds that you heard, some of the sounds you thought you'd hear that maybe you didn't, or the ones that were unexpected. Tag us on our social media. We're at KidsSolve at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And again, don't forget to check out our website, solveitforkids.com, because there will be a page on our website for this episode with Bob. We'll have more information about him, and maybe we'll even have some clips or places that you can go listen to some of the sounds that Bob made.
Until we talk to our next guest, Jen and Jeff will be sitting quietly. Until next time, you won't hear us on
Solve it for kids.